What's up, and welcome to another edition of the Cover 2 Recap. I'm Edward Lewis, publisher of BruinSportsport.com. This is Ryan Karchi, the UCLA beat writer for the OC Register. We're here tonight at the Rose Bowl, where UCLA just got thumped by Stanford in a game that was really never close outside of the first two drives. Ryan, the big question everybody's asking is, what happened?
I think it's just the same thing that's happened every year against Stanford. This team is just too physical for UCLA's offense. I think Noel Mazzoni kind of hit it on the head when he was talking about it, that they've had a tendency to get impatient in games like this. He kind of put that on himself, which I think is probably the right move, that they go away from the run game, which was actually working, and they have these 3 and outs. And once you give up possessions, once you fail on these possessions, Stanford will just control the ball, and they never got them out of their style. I haven't seen them get Stanford out of its style, maybe other than in a quarter or two in the Pac-12 title game in 2012. Other than that, Stanford has just controlled the ball at will on this team, and I think of all the losses they've had this season, this is easily the most disappointing, not just for the stakes, but just the fact that they just did not look ready. I mean, this is whether it's coaching, the players, this team was just not prepared to go into a situation where it had a lot at stake, and that's kind of been the issue for a long time. I mean, other than the USC games, what big games has this team won? So I think at this point, I'm not sure how they end this season. I mean, this is a huge letdown. I think they downplayed that a little bit, but at the same time, I don't know how you bounce back from that and win a middling Pac-12 bowl game, because this was just probably their worst effort of the season.
Kevin Hogan had kind of the game of his life. I think he was 16 for 19. He was shaking off guys in the pocket, shaking off guys when he got outside the pocket. UCLA couldn't stop the run game to save their lives. Brett Hundley had a real nice first quarter, a real good half of a first quarter, and then just was bad for the rest of the game. Left the game in the fourth quarter with a finger injury that looked pretty serious. He had a big ice pack on after the game, and nobody knows what his status will be for the bowl game. But what are the ramifications? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are the ultimate ramifications of this loss and UCLA going forward?
Well, I think it just proves that, Miles Jack said, in the press conference after the game that, they wanted to be considered among the Stanfords and Oregons, and they thought this was the year, and it just wasn't. They're clearly not ready for that. At this point, I mean, you're losing a lot of key guys. So from there, I think you're going to have to not rebuild, but reload a little bit in the this coming season next year. Brett Hundley, his final game at the Rose Bowl. Eric Kendricks is gone. He's been a steadying hand of that defense. So there's going to be a lot of changes, and I think at this point, we're going to have to look inside of Jim Mora and really see what he has to do as a coach. I mean, at this point, he's going to have probably his toughest job coaching, heading into next season with potentially a true freshman quarterback, defense that is kind of lacking those steadying hands. At this point, I think UCLA should be disappointed. I mean, this is a season that should have turned out better. People thought they were going to be national title contenders. A few hours ago, maybe they still were. But you have to win big games. You have to be able to, put up or shut up in situations like this, and they just didn't.
One of the tougher jobs Mora has to do going forward here is getting his players to kind of get out of this gutty little Bruin mentality. I know everybody hates to hear it, UCLA fans hate to hear it, but Miles Jack said after the game that, we only really played well because we lost 2 games and our backs were against the wall and all you media disappeared and all that outside distraction was gone. And now that you guys are back and ESPN's talking about us, and maybe that's why we didn't play so well. And it's like, Miles, I appreciate your honesty, but you can't say that. I mean, that falls squarely on the players or even the coaches, that you're not ready for thgoing these big games because there's too much pressure on you.
I also thought it was strange how Jim Mora handled his press conference. He kind of reiterated that, we're extremely young, we're going to get older, that sort of thing. I think people are just kind of tired of hearing that at this point. This team is not that young, really. Like in the grand scheme of things, they have this experience. Even the young players, I mean, they were much younger last year, so as a whole. So at this point, he said that, we need to just keep recruiting guys who can play up to their physicality. Kind of sounding a little bit like players are being thrown under the bus. I mean, it depends on how you interpret that, but I just thought it was a strange way of responding to a game in which they clearly were outplayed, clearly outcoached, and they clearly have a lot of work to do.
They're getting there, though. They got a lot of recruits coming in. 5-star quarterback Josh Rosen this will be his team next year. But before we get to that, they have a bowl game. Tell us what their bowl possibilities are and where they'll likely end up at the end of this month.
At this point, it looks like it's probably going to be Holiday Bowl or Foster Farms Bowl in San Francisco. So it looks like they'll be staying more local. I think there's maybe still an outside shot of the Alamo Bowl, but at this point, I think that's probably highly unlikely, assuming Oregon takes care of business against Arizona in the Pac-12 title game. There's still some moving parts, but at this point, I think you're going to count on a middling kind of Pac-12 bowl, so pretty far from what they were hoping for this bowl season.
That'll wrap up our coverage from today's UCLA game at the Rose Bowl. As always, you can follow Ryan's coverage of UCLA on Twitter at Ryan_Karchi. You can follow me on Twitter at LewisBSR. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in to the Cover 2 Recap.